Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arash's World. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Andrew Hahn. Welcome to Arash's World. Hello.
Thank you, Arash, and welcome to my world. So we get to share a world and whatever the third is that we create together and with all of your wonderful audience. So we're all in a world together. It's all of our
Great.
worlds.
Thank you. So just to get started here, we'll start with the toughest question first. How would you briefly describe yourself?
Myself?
In any way you see fit.
I know I still have a lot of growing to do. And I've been working on myself for many, many years. And I feel like I've climbed a lot of a mountain, but there's still a lot more to go to get to the mountaintop. I describe myself as all of the greatest gifts of somebody who is very self-absorbed, which means that I can be unbelievably creative, and it also means that I can be unbelievably narcissistic. I'm a bunch of contradictions, as my co-writer would say, and I'm sort of I would say that I want to, from a very visceral, deep place, understand everything I can about people and what makes them grow and what makes them tick, because I've always loved people, and sort of like I've taken everything I've ever done and applied it to that. But it's also like I have a sense of beauty in the world, and that there is something like aesthetically stunning that we could touch, at least for a moment. And then I deal with all of the pain that comes when I'm not there, and the sort of despair that happens, and then I try to sit with it as best I can. And I love what I do. I'm passionate about what I do. And if I could do something to be of service in the world right now, then I'll be feeling like my life was worth it.
Absolutely. Wonderful introduction here. I think one of the things I've also learned is that there is so much beauty that I wasn't aware of previously until you grow, as you're saying, you transform and things become so much clearer and you realize, oh my God, I did not see this way, or my perspective changes, or my whole being changes. And it's so wonderful. And let's talk about that kind of transformation, because your book is the 1 Hour Miracle, a 5-step process to guide your self-healing. And so healing, self-healing, guiding it, miracle, these are words that resonate with a lot of us, and they're also loaded with a lot of meaning for each of us. And yeah, so what is the 1 Hour Miracle? Maybe to get started with that question.
Well, I'll tell you what it is for me. What we're really inviting people into is more freedom. At any time you have greater freedom and greater capacity for awareness and compassion and engagement in life, I would say that's a miracle. And sometimes it looks biblical. I mean, I can tell you stories of things that look miraculous in the sense of a biblical miracle. And we do have stories like that truly people have said this is a miracle because they've been in chronic pain for 7 years and it goes away in 20 minutes and never comes back. So they think that's kind of a miracle. But I would say it's also a miracle when you're not quite as compulsive, or you're a little bit more able to live your dream and not be worried about it, or a little bit less self-important, or whatever it is that brings you more of a sense of humility and grace and courage and all of those things. So I would say that's what a miracle is for me.
And in many cases, we get used to the status quo. We see things one way. And I think a lot of people, and myself included, for the longest time, I was afraid. And freedom comes, when freedom comes, it's also terrifying. It seems overwhelming because then you have to make choices and you're accountable for your choices and so on. But that is where the beauty also lies, I would say.
I agree with you. I mean, I think there are certain kinds of freedom that are more personal than interpersonal, like, although they have an interpersonal consequence, right? So if you come and you have anxiety about speaking in front of crowds, for example, right? And then we do a little bit of work and suddenly you can speak in front of crowds. Well, the greatest courage that may have taken is to go into what it was that was keeping you from doing it and going into the inner experience of whatever the fear was that ended up with you feeling like, oh my God, if I'm in front of a crowd, something horrific will happen. But then, as you say, there are other kinds of healing you do where you have to say, am I really living in alignment with what my true inner life is? And if I'm not living in alignment with it, can I still ignore that?
Mhm.
And because some of the work we do, of course, do you have a willingness to accept, the responsibility and accountability of living a whole new way of being with all of what that means to you and all of its consequences. And that is truly terrifying,
Mhm.
because then you get to the place of like, the exemplars in life are, are we willing to be crucified, so to speak? Or
Mhm.
we're going to say, why did you do this to me? I mean, can't I have a villa in southern France or whatever? So yeah, I think you're exactly right. It is terrifying, and you build to it. And
Eh,
I'm still doing it, and I've been doing this for a long time. And believe me, those exemplars, I'm not. I
it
aspire.
but it is extremely liberating as well, because then you suddenly like open up to a whole new world that you didn't know existed, that world of beauty that again gives us so many options that we can choose from, different paths to take. And I think one of the things that has made this much quicker now, has opened the pathways, and it's kind of like at warp speed now, is the pandemic. Because on one hand, we've had technology increase very rapidly, just gains by a decade. I think that's what estimates say. But at the same time, also, I think that the good side is that we've also reconnected more with ourselves. Many people are resigning jobs that they found out were not a fit to their core being. And so that is a movement, I think, in the right direction in many ways. And how would you say has the pandemic affected that kind of quest that we're talking about here?
I think the pandemic has had, well, first of all, I'd start with what you said. So that's easy. It's like, I think you're right that we have moved at warp speed. I think we've had to come into ourselves. I think for some people that's led to revelation, and for some people it's led to horror. And
Which then could lead to revelation. I think a lot of the things where we judge is just like all this that we have inside that is coming out, for better or for worse, but usually for better if we take the correct path and learn from it and grow, as you're saying.
well, that's always the choice. I mean, like life is always inviting you into remembering and healing, which is becoming whole and then evolving and growing. And it's just, from my point of view, it's just a question of when.
Mhm.
Some of us, we have to put our hand on the stove about a million times before we finally say, you know what, maybe there is a different way. And maybe, even though, I want the smell of cooked meat or something to be absolutely disgusting about it, there may be a better way that I can learn and see what was making me do that over and over and over again. And if you can find that out very quickly and transform it, you don't have to do it. Otherwise, eventually you'll learn, because like life teaches you. So it's just like, do you go kicking and screaming or do you go smiling? That's called free will, I think.
And
Because
I think, just to butt in here quick, sorry, it's also like we try to control things and we might have the perfect plan, and then something unexpected like the pandemic just throws everything out, and we have to adapt to that. So no matter how well we think we control things, there's always the unexpected that can pull us out of that.
it's true, but
It's a lesson in humility in many ways, I would say, right?
I would say that's extremely true. And if we think we control things, life teaches us, I think, that the one thing ultimately we control is not the external. The only thing we have any control over is how we're going to be in relationship with it. That's
Mhm.
it. So I think you're exactly right. If you think your salvation is I can control what's going on outside of me, life will teach you.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yes.
Absolutely. And one thing I've noticed though, and you're a licensed clinical psychologist, and in this field as well, and psychiatry and all these mental health fields, there is an openness to spirituality. There's an openness to religion. There's an openness to the idea of a miracle that did not exist previously, in my view. That was seen as like people were trying to guide you in a different direction. But now it's like, I find this recently, and I took a class on positive psychiatry, and it's like spirituality, mindfulness, religion, these are being accepted more than previously in previous times.
Well, I would like to think that's one of the reasons, because I started doing the work that's in this book 30 years ago.
Mhm.
And I actually started in some ways writing this book 25 years ago. And people said, the world isn't ready for it. And it's still, because the premise of this book is so different pretty much from the rest of our field in a lot of ways, because we're starting with life itself, and we're saying that who we are is life. And when we get into difficulties, when we forget that. So we're not starting with any aspect of life, whether it's cognition or emotion or behavior or brain function or any of these things. We're saying all of those are aspects that get manifest through energy. And we're starting with the energy of life itself. And that makes a profound difference from my point of view. And, I've been with that idea for decades, and I think the world is more ready for it. And I hope that if that's true, that our book makes a small contribution. Joni and my book makes a small contribution to moving that along. And that would make us very grateful.
Yeah, there's so much truth to it too, as I was reading through your book. And I also love the way you're defining trauma. And there seems to be a misunderstanding about it, or very limited notion of trauma. It's like something that's very extreme. But I think like we all pass through trauma, and there's nobody who's exempt from it. Of course, there are, again, in degrees and on a spectrum, but it's something that we have to all deal with. And it doesn't, like a life without trauma, in my view, does not exist really, because, and we're going through it right now collectively, globally as well.
Well, I think I mean, I love what you're saying. I think it's true that there are collective trauma, there's individual trauma. I like our definition of it also because it makes you the expert on trauma.
Mhm.
Because, I mean, even if you're not aware that you're traumatized, trauma is a subjective experience. If there's something that you can't take in stride, it can't be taken in stride or handled or integrated, you're traumatized.
Mhm.
And that's anything. So like, I mean, I don't want to go into it, but it's not just bad things that can traumatize you. If something is too good and you can't integrate it, it's a trauma also, except that it plays out not as getting away from something, which is aversion, but it gets out in craving. So you want to create that experience over and over and over again. We call those wonderful patterns. So we call that positive emotional charge. Or there's so many things that are traumatic, and not all of them are, you're in war and a bomb goes off, or you have ritual abuse. And theoretically, if you were a wise enough being, even those things wouldn't traumatize you, because if you could integrate them, you could say they're doing something to my body, but they can't touch me. But of course, most of us aren't there. But it makes it not that somebody outside objectively is identifying what it is that's so bad that can't be handled. You get to, and we know. How do we know? Because you're suffering. Suffering and trauma are really the same thing. Because, if you could say yes to everything, you might feel pain, but you wouldn't feel judgment or pain or anxiety or comparison or compulsion because of it. You would just say, I'm feeling pain. You'd be in the moment of your human experience, and you'd be able to like be really engaged and open still and not shut down in any way. So yeah.
In many ways, and we see a lot of loneliness, and that is a kind of trauma. That is a traumatic experience, because we're interconnected, but we cut ourselves out for whatever reason. And I think a lot of people are going through that, and they get stuck in that, and they get into negative thinking. And we really have to change that mindset, that mind frame that we have, and be open to these other experiences that are out there, and as well as following your 5-step process of like getting to healing, self-healing.
Well, I think what you say about loneliness is profoundly true, and I think it's there's an existential aspect to loneliness and aloneness, but there's also a collective in our culture aspect, and there's very personal aspects. And clearly, we have forgotten certain things that more Aboriginal cultures knew, which is that there is only, there is only communion, there is only oneness. Why would we ever alienate ourselves from any aspect of ourselves? But that's what happens when you become, Cartesian, and you think that thinking is fundamental to being, as opposed to being is fundamental to everything. And then of course, once you do that, you stop remembering that who we are is everything. So if I forget that I'm you, then of course I'm going to do something horrific to you, or I won't have compassion for you, or I won't love my neighbor like myself, because I'll forget that my neighbor is myself. And it's very sad. It makes me want to cry, actually.
Well, it's also like the loneliness that exists in couples and in families. It doesn't mean that you're just alone, but it's like being lonely in even a relationship. And I see that with many people who are not fulfilling, who are not thriving in their relationships. They're not enjoying it. It's just something that, like a car, is a possession, a car and a house and a partner or a family. And I think that kind of true connection with our lifestyle, with our the family members, with whatever we're doing and our work and so on, is much needed. And we are just kind of like deluded by things that will not make us happy. That could be income or money or possessions, and really connect to that part that gives us that life satisfaction. But it's many people fail to see that, I think, and suffer as a result.
Well, I think that's true, because they think, if insofar as we think that material things are going to lead to any kind of ultimate satisfaction, we have difficulty. And what you say about relationship, of course, is true, because if you really want to have an intimate relationship, right, you have to be really fully engaged, to be present with someone, and to be present with yourself, but then with someone else. You have to be fully engaged, and you always have to have your heart open. You have to be open-minded. And how many of us are able to do that? And then, of course, the problem in relationship is that we go in with expectations that lead to assumptions that we're not willing to look at. We don't look at the fact that we come in with our own very limited lenses because of our personalities, or because of our, in the grossest sense, life experience. So we come in predisposed to knowing how relationship is supposed to be, as opposed to being open, and with couples, the most horrific things is what we call mutual grudges. And people play out mutual grudges in couples so much. It's like, why we marry someone, why? Well, we love them, that's true, but we also marry them because we want to heal our parents' relationship, or our relationship with our mother, or our relationship with our father, or whoever it is. And then, of course, we reenact our parents' relationship, or we reenact our relationship with one of our parents. And of course, we're not aware of it, but we just put their head on our spouse. And if it's our parents, we put, I'll put my father's head on me and my mother's head on you, and go and we'll kill each other in the name of love, but it's because we don't realize we're trying to heal, choices we made when we were very young, because
Partly it goes back to what we were saying about the control, and you think you are in control, but then when you enter a relationship and your freedom and everything, the dynamics change and becomes like, I see it as a third living entity that is between you, and you creating something. But I think one of the problems is we are striving for perfection, or we think we're striving for perfection. That is an illusion, and it causes a lot of harm and suffering. So we want to be the perfect person in many ways, and even the perfect spouse, if you like. And the other part is we're afraid of showing our true feelings, of becoming vulnerable and opening up to the other person. And that's because if we open up, we're seen as imperfect. And again, it becomes a vicious cycle in many ways.
Well, I think there certainly is validity to that. I think, some of us, I think perfection is the issue. For some of us, If I think about it in terms of personality, there are some of us who want to be perfect. Like
Mhm.
I'd say about a third of the world really lives about trying to be perfect. One from the gut, and the people who do it from their gut, it's sort of like they say there's a perfect way to act. And the ones from the heart, they say there's an aesthetic vision, in my heart of what beauty is, and I aspire to live aesthetic perfection. And then there are, people who have a fantasy about, like, the ideal experience, and I'd say one third of the world looks at the world that way. And then they have to come to their own sense of that they'll never be fulfilled, or that they are trying to be aesthetically perfect because they think that there's a certain ugliness in them, or that they have to be ethically perfect because they think they're underneath it, they have a fear that they're bad. Now there are other fears also, I think, from that point of view, but I think perfectionism is one of three kinds of fears, in fact. There are other people who don't care about that so much. They care more about worthiness and a sense of lack around worthiness, which isn't quite the same thing. And there are other people who I would say it's about it's not really perfection, but it's a sense of there's no possibility that they'll ever be loved, no matter what they do.
Mhm.
And I'd say those are the three kinds of problems. But all of us, it's like we won't be with the fear we have underneath it. Because if we could be with the fear about ourselves, then we wouldn't have to prove anything to ourselves or anybody else, or drink alcohol, or do whatever it has to do to protect ourselves from experiencing the fear. But that's the most difficult thing there is, to find the things we're most afraid to experience about ourselves. And for one moment, let them, touch them, because we think they're a black hole and we'll end up non-existing. And in fact, we end up free. So, which is the same thing, I guess.
I think it's also people are afraid of being honest. And I think like honestly looking at things and saying, okay, these are my limitations, and I won't be able to become a great tennis player just because I can't. And so when you're striving for things that you will not be able to do anyways, that causes a suffering. And I think just being also very honest with oneself and knowing your strengths, we often overlook that, but
Yeah.
also your weaknesses, and
Yeah.
we often don't want to look there. So it's kind of finding that right balance of really who are we, and then work on them. These are not fixed traits. These are things that we can change and work on and improve on.
Well, I think I have some sense about where you're at. I think really what it is ultimately, I think it's about self-acceptance.
Mhm.
So the way, in a funny way, to improve, if I took the last aspect of what you said, is if I could be with and accept the things I'm most afraid to admit about myself, right?
Mhm.
Then, of course, I could be honest with everything. I could be honest with my word and deed. I could be honest in my heart. I could be honest, you know, in terms of being open-minded. I could stay open in that way and really truthful. But as you say, most of us can't do that. And then we have to find some way to lie to ourselves, because we just think we can't handle the truth.
Mhm.
It's just a different kind of truth. It's not like, in the movies with Jack Nicholson, but
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, like to look at all the different parts, even the parts that are, especially actually the parts that are painful. And I remember my own healing, which started about, I guess, 5 years ago, was there was a sensation of fear, this dread that was coming, and I was actually taking the bus, and it just came over me, and I said, I don't want to go there, and I told myself, no, don't go there. But then afterwards I opened up to that, and it's like, yes, I will go there, and it's very painful, it's a lot of suffering and so on, but it's that proverbial getting rid of facing your inner demons and getting rid of them, and you come out so much freer, so much happier, so much brighter once you go through that dark tunnel. But I think a lot of us are just scared of facing that, myself included, but it's like it's so necessary towards growth to walk that dark path, I would say.
well, I would say it's a dark path, and that it's in the shadows, that instead of, like, saying, if I really let my panic, as I'm getting on this bus and I don't want to get on the bus, what would happen if for 1 second, in the case you're talking about, I experience the sensation that I'm calling panic?
Mhm.
and that it has a life of its own. So when you have your panic, you say, oh my God, my heart's pounding fast.
Mhm.
Then I'd say, well, Arish, you're not having panic. Someone whose name is heart pounding fast is having panic. Why don't you just bring all your attention there and choose to bear witness and hold heart pounding fast and let it share its story.
Mhm.
And then it might tell you a story of like you're on the Hindenburg and you should never have gotten onto the blimp in the first place and how much of a fool you were. And of course, the bus looks like the Hindenburg. And of course, you're going to like go into a fiery inferno and die or something. And
Mhm.
that's really weird. I didn't know I was on the Hindenburg or whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think the way you discover is you say, I'm going to bear witness to that aspect of being that is experiencing the panic, but it's not who I am. It's just an experience. It's I can bear witness to, and I can hold whoever that is with compassion. So
Mhm. And a lot of our, and I think you would probably agree, a lot of our trauma, if you like, a lot of our perception of the world comes from childhood and childhood experiences that we've had. And this is what I love so much about psychoanalysis, because you're looking at the part of your life where we felt vulnerable, and that in many people it stays with them. And as you were saying earlier about like putting the projecting like the father onto your husband, or the wife, the mother onto your wife, and so on. And these are things that we unconsciously carry with us. And once we, however, look at that and bring it out in the open, that changes a lot of things and a lot of ways of our behavior, of our thinking, of our feeling. It affects us on a whole scale, on a different level.
I agree with you. I think anything that comes into the open and you can be with it, you
Mhm,
become
mhm,
free.
mhm,
And it can be childhood experiences. We have in our book a lot of childhood experiences that get reenacted over and over and over again. I think the interesting thing is because the person who wrote our first wonderful, testimonial is one of the most well-respected and senior psychoanalysts in all of New England. And it never occurred to her that um, things that she would work on psychoanalytically and take a long time with, may not have even started in what we call this lifetime. And my training was very psychodynamic, and I was
mhm,
in psychoanalysis. I know it well. I have great respect for it, and I really do, by the way. I think it's because it's an extraordinary way of working. I would say instead of free association, I think finding body sensations and bringing our attention to them, in my experience, is a simpler, somewhat more powerful way of going about things than just free associating.
mhm,
um, because if you bring your attention to the body sensation and then free associate, you really have lasered in on the being that has the problem, as opposed to what it gets revealed in mind. You're going to the body, but of course, if pounding heart is a living being, it's got a mind, it's got a heart, it's got a body, it's got an everything, and it's here to tell you a story. And I find it unbelievably simple and powerful. But like I said, we have one story in there of a boy who had major depression because of one thing that happened to him when he was a little boy. And he chose major depression as a way to protect himself from something that was such an overwhelming pain. I don't know if we have this story in there because I forget, but we had another woman who came in because she knew she had ritual abuse, but she was having all kinds of symptoms still. And she'd been in psychodynamic therapy for many, many years, really good psychodynamic therapy, but she was still having a lot of symptoms. And we found out that even the ritual abuse was a reliving, an echo of something that was worse from whatever you want to call a past life or the imaginal or whatever. And when she found that story, her symptoms all went away. But it wasn't a story that happened to her. It was a story that actually happened to a fetus, and whatever you want to make of that. But when she found that story and helped that fetus, which was very powerful for her given her religious beliefs, um, it transformed all the symptoms that she'd been working on for years in very good therapy, but hadn't really. She said, I must have missed something. And I said, well, I'm sorry, because I use muscle testing to determine what's going on. I said, the thing that you're working on here didn't start in this lifetime. And in fact, some of the things you're talking about watching people's arms get ripped off from each other and having to do it and whatever, really is a reliving. And then she found what she was reliving that was really for her worse than even the ritual abuse. And when she transformed that being from this, whatever you want to call it, other lifetime or imaginal, mythological, or, undreamed dream, her symptoms went away. So,
And we do have a lot of cases of psychosomatic illnesses. And I think a majority also of suffering that we have is that connection between the mind and the body. And one thing I was quite fascinated to hear about is somatic markers. So that when we go, and as you're mentioning that, it makes me think of that. When we go through experiences that are stressful, there's certain parts of our bodies that are responding to that, and it stores that information. And by finding a way of releasing not just the mind, which again psychoanalysis would do, but also the body, and finding that balance between the two to really get rid of those symptoms and be free of them again.
well, I would say every symptom is an invitation to remembering something, and it's a clue to what you're remembering, right?
Mhm.
So, and then it's just a question of, can you go in through the symptom, or do you have to find the deeper sort of pattern or theme underneath? And we can do that as we can determine, do you start with the thing you come in with, or do we start with, the theme that's underneath what you're coming in with? And we can determine that. Um, um, but we have so many stories of, I mean, look, some of my most favorite cases are people who have chronic pain that no one can understand. And it's because the chronic pain, even though they're very sure it's about an accident, right? And we have a couple of stories like that in the book of people who have horrific chronic pain, and people are saying, look, we know you had this terrible accident, but like, you shouldn't be in so much pain, but your pain hasn't gone down for 7 years after the accident. Why is that? And if I do my determining through what's called muscle testing or kinesiology, or in our field it's called ideomotor cueing, I can say the reason is because if I muscle test and see if any of your pain is like physical trauma, it says no. And our first story in the book is about a woman who had a horrific accident, and she was sure that it was, a fate. But it turns out that it was the total reenactment of a story that happened, for her point of view, 2,000 years ago, that totally was relived in that accident. Although, of course, she didn't know that, because it never occurred to her that the accident she had where she fell and nearly, broke her back on a rock was the reliving of being stabbed in the back after she betrayed a whole lot of people. And when she found that story, all of her back pain magically went away in 1 second and never came back, because she found out what the true root of it was.
Mhm. And that is the biggest question, I think, that I've always been fascinated with, is the question why. And once you look at that, this is also, why is this happening? What is that? Why am I alive? Why is all of this occurring? And so once we get to the root of it, I think that is really important. But a lot of people are not as interested in that question. They'd rather want to skip it and want to go to a fast solution. And instead of really like looking at the root problem. And I find that not just with people, but also things CBT and cognitive behavior therapy, of like kind of looking at it on a surface level, and the medical science also kind of trying to get rid of those symptoms without really looking the main cause that is there, the root of the suffering that is there.
Right. Well, as we said before, suffering is just something that can't be handled and taken in stride and integrated. And of course, every symptom, it's understandable. People want to move away from pain.
Mhm.
So we have, something is painful, we say, let's go in the other direction and let's get as far away from it as possible. But if we do something counterintuitive and we go towards it and say, of course, I'll let myself be pulled into it, because what is gravity? Gravity is love. It's like something that, I'm attracting you and I'm attracted to you. So why don't we come together? And when you go into it, of course, what happens? You say, oh my goodness, that's why headache is here. Or, oh my goodness, this is why I have chronic neck pain, because, I couldn't handle being guillotined in revolutionary France, and I was ripping my head trying to get away from a guillotine that's coming down on my head, or whatever it is. I know that, sounds funny, but I mean, or to, our deepest existential fears of non-existence. And they all are things that are really painful and we want to get away from. And on a whole other level, they're an invitation to remembering who we are until we know that who we are is everything. And the second we know that who we are is everything, we know why we're here. Because we're here to do two things. On a personal level, we're here to remember that who we are is life evolving, except we can do one thing life can't do. Because if you're everything, the one thing you can't do is have relationships. You can't have experiences because you're everything. So how are you ever going to have an experience, right? So if we could become self-aware life, we can simultaneously be everything and still have relationships. And then we can say, what is our particular role? Like we have all these 3 trillion cells, right? Well, on one level, they're all differentiated and each of them has their own particular role to play in the service of the evolution of life itself. And I would say that's our soul mission, is like, what is my thing that I contribute, whatever that is, to the evolution of this living being called life that has a body, which is everything in the universe that is matter, everything. And so I'd say that's why I think we're here. I think we're here to remember who we truly are and play our role in the evolution of who we truly are, and everything else, so we're in service to ourselves in life. That's why I'd say we're here.
I really like how it's like, because a lot of people also are looking for like, what should I do? They want answers. They want like clear-cut answers. And with your book and your approach, it's really like you're guiding the person, not necessarily teaching, but guiding them in the direction so they can find for themselves. And when you're in charge of your own healing, and again, you also mentioned in your title self-healing, when you're in charge of it, you're exploring, and it also gives you confidence, and it also makes you feel proud of being on that quest. And then it's kind of a cycle that reinforces itself in many positive ways, instead of just going to the doctor or let's say the psychologist, say, oh, this is what you're suffering from, there you go, you got the answer. I think your approach is so much more dynamic, so much more wonderful.
Well, our approach, thanks you. I think you're right. We turn everything on its head. We say we're not the experts on anything except for a framework and a protocol. That's what we're the experts on. You're coming to me for my expertise about having studied all the possibilities in life so that I can, because if you can't think about something, right, if it never occurs to you that the reason you have tinnitus is that like a little green man put like rods in your ears so you wouldn't hear something, you're not gonna, if that's the most elegant explanation, however you want to make sense of it, and you don't have to think it's real or not, but if your tinnitus goes away, who cares, right?
I like
Right.
that. Yeah.
So
It's like, sorry, it's like the placebo effect that, like, when people, if people get better by just, let's say, drinking water, having a sugar pill, whatever, that's wonderful. I mean, that's the idea too in many ways, and that's causing headaches for the scientific community of how to explain for that. And I do believe there's something else that's at work that is really making this happen. And it's just wonderful that that does exist. That gives me hope, that because the placebo is like more powerful than powerful drugs in many ways, not always, of course, but in many ways. And I think that's an important thing to tap into and to explore.
well, I mean, if you read our first forward, Anne-Marie Chasson, who is Andrew Weil's partner in his work, that's what she talks about. The whole forward of her book is like, she was this mainstream doctor, and then she starts looking at the placebo effect and she says, there is something more going on here. So it's exactly as you say. So, when we really focus on something, amazing stuff can happen. But then we say, well, why does it work for some people and not for others? And then you find out that if trauma gets in the way of the placebo effect, it doesn't work as well. And that's what you see. Well, why? Like some people, it's like they can say, I am going to live like it's happening right now, right? That's really what I would say the law of attraction is it's people think it's egoic. If I think about something, it will happen. No, but I think that's, we don't, on that level, our beliefs do not create reality in this level. They do on another level, but on this level, if you think your beliefs create reality, and I have a loaded gun and I'm pointing at your heart, and if I say I shoot you, and you say, well, I don't believe it's going to hurt me, we have a word for that, and it's not a pretty word, right? So, but I think on another level, it's profoundly true when there's no trauma. If we feel experience in the body like our life is different right now, particularly if we line up, how do we know what's true for us, right? Well, it's the same thing. We think it's top down, right? We think, oh, the head knows what's going on. It's the expert. We should ask it. The head doesn't know shit, just like most of us. We don't know what's best for people. The head doesn't know what's best for us.
Mhm.
It's the belly, it's the gut. It says, oh, I know what's true for me when I just let my attention go freely. I know what's true for me. And then the heart says, given whatever that is, what I know for me is what's true, right? Not the truth, what's true in my being. Then I can ask, well, what do I really desire or aspire to given what I know is true? And then the head comes in and says, well, we can figure out some ways that we might take a first step or something, right? Well, it's the same thing in our field, right? We're not the expert except in, like, I can give you a framework and a way of doing something that's going to be useful. Your job is you're going to take a journey, but who's the real expert? Life. And life is revealing itself to you and with you and through you two ways. First of all, through this deepest knowing. Like when you just let your head go and you say, life, I'm not going to fill it in with my ego, but I'm going to be open. I'm going to actively receive you and you teach me.
Mhm.
Okay. But the other way it teaches us is whenever we have a discomfort, life is saying, you should pay attention to this and you shouldn't get rid of me. I'm here. I'm with you. It's like God saying, I'm with you. And you say, I deny you. I hate your guts. And I mean, we say that to life, right? We say we hate your guts because it's showing up in something we don't like consciously. So instead of saying, oh my God, you're here with me and you're trying to reveal something to me, you say, give me a pill and get rid of it. And that's why I say, if I wanted to say one thing to everybody, it would be in this. I'd say, whenever you have a discomfort, before you take a pill and say, I hate your guts headache, so to speak, say, headache, I'm going to choose to become you like an actor who's going to play a role. And in my new story, my name is going to be Headache. I'm going to become Headache. And I'm going to focus on you so much. And then I'm going to just tune in and I'm going to start listening to you and sharing whatever comes to me, and worlds open up when you become Headache. And whenever you're suffering about something, which just means you can't accept it. And acceptance, by the way, does not mean passivity.
Mhm.
Acceptance means I accept the situation, including the changes that happen if I don't accept me, right? If being non-judgmental, but being non-judgmental doesn't mean being not discerning. You can say, I don't have to judge a murderer, but I may want to stop them from doing the murdering,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And the whole thing is, can we keep our hearts open? And that's the lesson everywhere. That love, really, which is acceptance, conquers fear.
Mhm.
Love, it conquers hate. Love conquers despair. Love conquers rage. What is love? It says, I can be with you, whoever you are, without judging you, but withholding you. If you have a child who's having a temper tantrum, you don't throw them through a window. Maybe you do, but hopefully you don't. You say, I'm here with you. I can hold you, and you can kick, scream, and do whatever, and I'm just here with you, and I won't be reactive. I'll just hold you, and we'll find out what the heck's going on somehow.
And it's being curious about like who you are and yourself. And I was suffering from migraines. Where you talk about headaches, I was suffering from pretty much weekly migraines and high blood pressure and sleep apnea and all that. And I go to the family doctor who would say you need to take pills, and I say, okay, I don't think that will help the issue. And then I go and they say you have to wear this machine at night for sleeping, and it's like, can I get better? Can I heal? And say, no, this is for life. This is chronic. You're always with it. And
Well, you know what I'd say there?
I've
I'd say,
recovered from all three of them.
I'd say, how do you know for sure?
How do I know for sure that I've
Well,
recovered?
if a doctor said to me, you'll
Oh
never,
yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I would say, well, maybe nothing in your experience leads you to believe that it isn't possible, but how do you know for sure?
And that's the intuition that I had. I said, I know there's a way of dealing with it without following your advice, without following the doctor's advice who would tell me, because I found their view was limiting. And then later on, when I went and she checked my blood pressure, she said, how did you do it?
No, tell
And
us. Does your audience know how you? I don't know. I want to know. How'd you do it? Because like
and
I
it's
love
exactly, I mean, that's what pretty much all my podcast is about, is like really taking charge of your own healing as you are doing. And I'm also curious also, how did you get started on this? Because you're talking about like 3 decades ago. How did you get started on this path of healing and self-healing and all that? What was the trigger, if you like? Is there anything specific?
Well, yeah.
that you like to share?
Oh, I'm happy to share anything.
Okay.
Well, I'm not happy to share everything. I'm still like, there's certain things that I would be afraid to say to the world that, I keep still somewhat private, but, someday I'll do that probably, and be St. Augustine and talk about all of the shameful things I've done in my life, but not right now. Well, there's a couple of answers to your question about how I went down this path. And, there's the answers to what happened when I was very young. Then I went to graduate school. Then I had this story where I had this extraordinary experience of um, being at a place called the Self-Realization Fellowship with a friend who had hurt herself very badly. And she actually got to a place where she couldn't walk anymore. She was in so much pain. And she sat down on a bench, and I sat down across from her to have her put her ankle on my leg. And I was flooded with light and energy. And I just started channeling it to her ankle, and all of her pain, all of her discoloration and swelling and pain went away. And I said, this is, not Kansas and anymore. We was not in the Wizard of Oz. So that really was transformative. And then I went to do all kinds of trainings. And then I heard about a woman who had done this uh, really interesting session on an asthmatic who couldn't barely walk and was wheezing so badly at a training. And she did this thing called muscle testing that I never heard of. And had her tap all over her body while she told the story. And then the woman goes outside and starts to run up and down the street and is exhausted and exhilarated because, she said, I haven't been able to run a step in 7 years. So I found out who that was, and we put together what she knew about craniosacral therapy and NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And she was one of Roger Callahan's first students, who was one of the originators of putting together acupressure and psychology. And then she had done her own research on loss and violence traumas, which is brilliant. And I brought everything I knew about psychoanalysis and depth psychology and spiritual psychology and postmodern systems theory and narrative therapies and energy healing and everything. And we put ourselves together and created something that she calls something and I call something else, because our worldviews are, let's say, somewhat different. And then I started doing my own trainings 25 years ago now. And it just keeps evolving because life keeps teaching me things. But there are certain fundamental things, that really life is about being able to just say yes to everything, including the changes that want to happen. That when you can't say yes to everything, a sensation is born, and it's a living being because it was born in a moment just like you were or I was, and it has a life of its own. It's not our body sensation any more than you're my Irish, right? I mean, you are, but I'm your Andy. And if you have migraine headaches, that being's name is migraine headache. It's not my migraine headache, or it's not the migraine headache. It's migraine headache, and migraine headache was born in a moment. And it's come to share a story. And if you'll listen to it, it will tell you its story. And if you really give it what it needs, theoretically, either it will go away, or you'll say, you know what, maybe I needed a migraine headache because I needed to slow down. But at least you won't be judging it anymore. And I never guarantee people their symptoms will go away because I'm not God. What I will say to them is one of two things will happen, right? Either the symptoms, if you stick around long enough, the symptoms will go away, or your relationship to them will change to such a degree that you won't have any suffering about them. Let's say you came in and you said, Andy, here's what I want you to do. I want you to guarantee at a physical level I'll never die in this lifetime. Well, I would be pretty silly. I mean, it's not quite like migraine headaches, but I'd be pretty silly to say, I don't want to ever die. I want to live forever in this form, and I want, my body never to die. And I'd say, well, I'm not sure I can guarantee you that. But I might be able to guarantee you that if you do die, I'm not going to say you won't. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you'll live forever. I don't know. Who am I to say? Because I'm not God. But, I'm open to everything. I am open to everything. Believe me. I mean, I'm open to things that if you told me when I was in graduate school, I would have said, yeah, pigs fly to the moon. Now I'm open to pigs flying to the moon because I've seen things and I said, yeah, pigs will fly to the moon. But maybe I can get it so you're not anxious. And then who cares whether you die or not? And if you don't have any anxiety about your migraine headaches, you could say, well, are you really here to serve me, or is it time to let you go, or whatever? But it's like, if you're not attached to result, but you're just attached to, as you say, curiosity and opening to life and saying, you teach me because you know better than I do, right? Because I'm just the mystical concept. I'm just a cell in this being that has a body called, life, and it's a living being, and it knows a lot more than me, but I am it. That's the key.
We have doubts. We're skeptical about things. We're doubting things. And even myself, I remember, like, I watched the program The Secret, Rhonda Byrne's idea of like manifestation, and you desire something and you do the work and you wish it, and and again, if it's within reason as well, but it comes true. And I said, well, this is just bogus. And I tried it out, and it did come true, to my surprise. And then there's others, the unconscious, like, what are you talking about? The unconscious does not exist. I don't think that's true, and so on. And then you try it out and you have those wonderful results, and you realize, oh, there is more to it. And like you're saying, I think we have to open our eyes to many things that are happening, coincidences, or things that happen in front of our eyes that are astounding, and really like looking at them without judgment, as it's saying, and with curiosity and with an open mind, and see where it would take us. And in many cases, it's somewhere very good, very powerful.
Well, I would say as long as we apply it to everything, right?
Mm.
So, like, I would say doubt and faith are in this wonderful reciprocal relationship.
Mhm.
And both of them can be holy and both can be
I
demonic,
agree.
right?
Mhm.
So, like, if you have only faith and you go to a used car salesman, so to speak, and say, he says, well, I have 15 used cars, each one is better than the last. And like, oh, well, I had faith in, so I bought all of them. I would say there's a word for that, and it may not be faith. It may be the downside of faith. And doubt might be, I trust you, but I'm gonna like verify, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So the question is, it's also to everything in its season. It's
Yeah.
like, there's a time for faith and there's a time for doubt. And it's like, can we like let life teach us as opposed to thinking we know better? And as long as we do that, we could say yes to everything
Mhm.
and know when its time is right and know when its time is ended, just like day and night, you know?
Mhm.
So I would say as long as we can be really, really open-minded to all possibilities and not be evaluative and say some are better. We may have preferences,
Mhm.
right? Well, I prefer peas to carrots or whatever, but it doesn't mean peas are better than carrots, right?
In many ways,
So,
it's that intuition of really like trusting it. But that's when you doubt it. And when you doubt your intuition, that is, I think, counterproductive. That is not helping you.
well, that's because, yes, that's a different thing because that's really about that's not about doubt in one sense. It's about it's one of two things. It's either a trauma structure,
Mm.
right? So you're 8 years old and you're going around doing your thing, and then someone says, really? You think you could be da 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 da? And you had this dream, and suddenly you say, I better not ever have that dream again. So I'm going to protect myself and just doubt from now on, right? And
Mhm.
we have all kinds of stories like that, somebody who, like, had this creative idea, and then someone says, really? And they say, oh, I better not ever have that anymore. And then they come in with doubt. And the doubt is just a protection because they found out that if they really opened to their aliveness, they were going to get annihilated on some level. And they couldn't handle it. So they said, I'll call in doubt as a protection.
Mhm.
And you say, well, that makes some sense. You made the best choice when you were 4, but now you're 44, and maybe it's time to make a different choice. And that traumatized 4-year-old called in a protector called doubt. And if you could just bring your attention to that 4-year-old and the protection he's bringing in that he's forgotten was a choice, right? So that every time you get excited about anything, suddenly you like clamp up and you become constipated and you weren't even aware of it, right? Because you forgot what happened when you were 4. You go back, find, and say, of course you made a choice then because you were like, you were going after your dream, and then someone like killed you for it. And
Mhm.
now every time it comes up again, your wife is saying, he's like, he never goes for anything. He's like never takes a chance on anything. And you find out at 4, well, you were taking a chance and you got killed. So you say, well, it made sense at 4, but you can make a different choice now.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because my best decisions have been that gut feeling where it actually didn't make sense in a logical way. It didn't make sense. I decided to go and teach in Mexico with like minimum wage, and I had student loans at the time, and everyone told me this is the worst thing you could do. And I met my wife there, and it changed my life completely. So it's like it just felt right, and I was like, I want to explore that and see where it takes me. It might be the worst decision in terms of finances, but it ended up being the best in terms of relationships. And I think a lot of people are just hesitant there. But to go back to the
So
negative way, yeah,
I
sorry,
really want to say what you
sure,
say. I want to slow it down here
yeah.
because I think what you say is so true. If because it's a different, that's a different kind of knowing.
Mhm.
And that deepest intuitive knowing, I would say, if our rational minds, which I think has the power of one that tries to figure stuff out, I won't say shit, but stuff out, right? Well, it's going to, of course, it's run by trauma, it's run by your
I like
anxiety,
that.
it's run by your fear. But what is that deepest knowing? That deepest knowing, which is your life force, it's the same thing. That deepest knowing, when you tune in and say, I'm supposed to go to Mexico, and they say, you're crazy. And you say, I probably am, but I know it's true for me. So I'm going there anyway. And I may be crazy, but who cares? Because I know that's right for me. And if we all could do that, worlds would open up. And I say to people, and I've learned this the hard way myself, I say, if you really want to know what's true for you, get as quiet as you can, put one hand on your gut, and just say, I'm going to ask what's true for me. Or something comes to you and like that, and you say, I'm supposed to go to Mexico. Like this invitation come, it's the surrender experiment, so to speak, if you know that book, except, you also have to take into account that if you had a 2-year-old, and they were there and, they had, your whole family was here, maybe you don't go anyway, but at least then you say, well, I know I am not, but I know I got the invitation, right?
Mhm.
You have to say, well, there is life here. And if I had a 2-year-old kid, maybe I don't go to Mexico right now because of whatever, but I know it's there.
Mhm.
And if I'm really supposed to go, I take the 2-year-old with me, right?
Yeah.
So it's honoring of our responsibilities, but it's also honoring of our ability to respond to a deeper aspect of our own being, which is that gut knowing. And I'll tell you, that gut knowing is the same gut knowing that when you have a mother who weighs 110 pounds and a car rolls over a toddler and she has to pick up the car that weighs 2,000 pounds, and she picks up the car and, she say, how could you do that? And she said, I just knew I could do it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's the same energy as you say, I just know I'm supposed to go to Mexico, even though it makes zero rational sense. I
Exactly.
know it's true for me, and I know what, and something is drawing me there, and my heart is saying, do it, and I'm going, and like, what's the worst that can happen?
And I met somebody on the plane as I was going there, and he told me your life is going to change. You're going to get married and have a kid. And I said, you're nuts. That's not going to happen. And it did. And I told him afterwards, like, your words were prophetic. It did happen.
Well, you already knew, you just didn't know you knew.
Yeah, that's true. But going back to the one that I would disagree with is when you put your faith into something without actually making it happen. So I remember in grad school, this one student who would not study and say, "Yeah, okay, I'm going to get a good grade because I have faith in God and I'm going to do well." And it's like, well, instead, just like study. That's the best way of doing it. That kind of blind faith is not going to help you with those exams.
Uh, that's why I say I don't think in this dimension beliefs create reality.
That's true.
It's exactly for the reason you said. It's like people really believe in a certain kind of the law of attraction, say, well, I believe I'm going to do great, so I don't have to study. I'd say, no, that doesn't follow. That's called irresponsibility,
Mhm.
right? You know, so we can, I mean, it's sort of like, or someone said, I know that my beliefs create all reality. Someone said that to me. I said, okay, well, let's suppose for 1 second I have a loaded gun here and I'm pointing it at your heart and I'm going to fire the gun and you're going to tell me that it's not going to affect you at all. And I would say that's a little bit bananas because I have every confidence that virtually every time, it's not going to bounce off of you. Now, there may be one in a quadrillion times it does, but in this reality, in three-dimensional material reality, material forces do have an impact. And if you don't study for your exams, most of us will fail.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I think you're right. I think that is a
But then it's serving.
denigration. It's a desecration of
Yes.
something, and it's a reliving of a story of like narcissism of something that you
Yes. Yes.
think
Exactly.
is. Yeah. Anyway.
It's serving like your own purpose, and that's not it. It's like you ask for something and it might or might not happen, and that's the thing. But if it does happen, then it happened for a reason, and it kind of, but you do have to put in the effort. I think that's hugely important. That's really
Or
important.
you're going to learn what happens when you don't. And you'll say, oh,
Exactly.
maybe I had to learn that the whole world doesn't revolve around me and I can do whatever I want.
Best is
And
a combination of both, I guess.
but I'll tell you the other thing that I think, Arash, which is
Mhm.
important, which is you have to also be non-attached to the result. You may have gone to
Yeah.
Mexico, and in a different story, you might not have met your wife and had a kid. And that doesn't still mean it was the wrong choice.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, all you can do is say, I know there's an invitation here, but I don't yet know why. I'm not going to say I know why, because if I knew why, it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be saying I'm following something. And I have a sense it's the right thing for me, but there may be forces that are much bigger than me that are in play here, that all I can do is trust what I know and take that next step. But, I can't be attached to I found my wife and my kid. It may be that there's a large possibility you will, but maybe life veers off in a different direction for some reason. And all you can say is, I had an invitation, I took it, and we'll be open to what happens. And then life happens.
One of the things I'm not sure about, I'm struggling with, is the idea of destiny and vocation, and how much things we do control. Going back to our very first question, how much we don't, and if there's something that's pushing us in a specific way, or is it all our choice? Is it all free will? What do you think of that? What's your stance?
I'll tell you what I think about free will.
Mhm.
I think free will is one thing.
Mhm.
It's when that invitation comes that you talked about, do you say yes or do you say no? That's free will. When life presents you with something that you're suffering about, do you say, I have to delve into what's underneath this and find out what's causing the suffering? Or am I just going to, do something else? And I would say the more we say, I'm going to be open-minded and open-hearted and find out, the more we find out that things that look like fate were actually destiny. Because life was inviting us to come to some revelation, right? I'm supposed to go to Mexico. I had this accident, which is so much suffering, or I have these migraines, right? But the migraines are here on some level. What would happen if I change my relationship with them and just say, okay, I'm even going to say yes to migraines, right? I don't like you. I don't have to like you, but I'm going to at least say, you're here for some reason, that it's not just. And then you find out the accident you had that you sure was fate was the reenactment of something that happened 2,000 years ago, which is the first story in our book, of a woman whose accident was an exact echo of what happened 2,000 years early. I mean, it's like amazing, right? And she was sure it was an accident, except that when the session was over, she said, maybe it wasn't an accident after all. Maybe there was some template inside me, some engraving that was unconsciously co-creating this, because everyone here for some reason needed that to happen, even though from my point of view it was just the most horrific accident that led me to have chronic back pain for 7 years. But maybe that back pain was trying to help me remember what happened, whatever we want to call it, 2,000 years ago, and that's why it came to me. So I would say we have two choices. One is the one you talk about, which is, it's about vocation, really. It's like, I have this felt sense that what I'm to do right now as my part of life, right? In my differentiated way right now is I'm to go to Mexico, right? That's one of the two reasons I think we're here, is to open to whatever that is and as best we can say yes to it. And that, I think, teaches us, when we have that aliveness and we say, I'm going for it, right? And that's narrative instruction. I'm going to Mexico, right? And that's one of the two reasons I think we're here, is to follow life's lead. The second reason we're here is to remember that who we are is life. And that means I say yes to everything, right? Because when I say yes to everything, dense life, which is pain in chest, goes back into its pure form, if I say I'm here with you and I totally accept you, it goes from being what makes pain in chest. Who we are in this dimension is E squared, right? That's who we are, E squared. We are a verb. We are energy. Energy is not something that you can, it's not an identity. It is a flow. It is everything but an identity. When you can't accept something, E equals MC squared, matter, right? If you can't accept something, if something is unacceptable, if you can't say yes, energy slows, energy slows down by the speed of light squared and becomes dense. And all it wants to do is go back into its pure form in this dimension, which is E squared, which is on this dimension. That's what soul is. I think soul and E squared are the same thing in this dimension, because we do have a material body, but it is our possibility of becoming energy. That's why we're here. We're all here. And when we can say yes to everything, including being crucified, as opposed to saying, why have you done this to me? Why have you forsaken me? At which point we're not happy and we're still in matter. But the second we can say, they can't do anything to me because that's not who I am. That's not my body. I have a body, but it's not who I am. They can kill my body, but they can't kill who I truly am, because who I truly am is something that is not an identity. It's not killable because it's not a noun. You can't kill a verb. You can destroy an entrance, but you can't destroy entrance. I'm entranced by life. You can't destroy it. You can experience it, but you can't point to it, right? And that's when you really become this, the world becomes, in the best sense, a magical mystery tour, right? No, I never said that before, but that's what it really becomes. And that's what I think our second thing is. So it's to say, I'm going to remember that I am everything and everything is who I am, but I have my particular place to play, and life will reveal that to me if I open to, oh my goodness, like I have this deep felt sense in my being that just, yes, it's like my body is just feeling in aligned, and the words that are coming to me when I do that is Mexico. Okay? Mexico. And I honor that you listened, because look what came of it. Now I have to go and see your wife and your kid.
Well, my wife actually,
well,
my wife was in Mexico. She had dreams that she would meet the person she would be with. It was a prophetic dream. So she's a nurse and she's working in a lab, and they actually sent her to another place. So she was like, they rescheduled her and then put her in a different lab. And she said no, she was rebelling against it, like you're saying. It's like, no, I have to stay here because this is where I'm going to meet somebody important. And they said, no, you're going to go to the other place. And it's at the other place where, like, 2 weeks after that, we met. So it's also when you are trying to resist something that the invitation is really pushing you in that specific direction. It's like, just go. Just trust your gut feeling, your intuition, and just go, just do it. But I completely agree with you. There's only one part, and to be completely honest, that I'm still hesitant, and I will share that with you. I have no issue with soul. I think there is a soul. I do strongly believe there's an afterlife. For me, that's like not just a belief, it's like experiences. As you're saying, I will have a specific podcast about that later on at some point to get into. But past life is something that I'm a bit hesitant about. But I will say that the first time I went to Venice, I felt this feels like home. And it made no sense because I'd never physically been there. And that kind of came from the intuition that I usually trust. So that baffled me, because on a rational level, I say, no.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would say. In terms of healing, what you believe is none of my business. I'll find a way to talk to you. I don't care. If you say I'm an atheist and I never believe in past lives, I'll say I don't either. What's past lives? I mean, so to speak, because I can find an aspect of my community that says I'm just going to watch football games and drink beer. I just don't happen to do that, but somewhere in there there's someone who drinks beer still, I guess. But so I don't care. I don't care what you call it. I'm just looking for the most simple, powerful thing that will lead to transformation that's useful. So you can say, never say past lives, and I'll say fine, and I'll just say, well, let's call it a movie or the imaginal or a personal myth or an undreamed dream. I don't care what you call it, it, but what I found is the most powerful, simple story that will be useful for your healing and growth is not going to be a story where you're the main character. You make sense of it any way you like.
Mhm.
Now, if some people, but I've had people, I've had some amazing stories. Like you can watch on another podcast, we had this man who was, a medium. And he didn't believe in past lives either, which was interesting because he was talking to the souls of dead people, but he didn't think past lives could affect him. But he had this terrible stomach problem. Okay. So we did work on a terrible stomach problem. We found out that it was a traumatic death, a really awful traumatic death. I could do that. I can determine that. And he dropped into that experience of traumatic death and his stomach problems. And suddenly he knew exactly where he was. In 1873 in Missouri, he knew he was a train robber. He could experience the whole thing very vividly. And he watches himself get shot in the stomach and have this excruciating long death, at which point he dissociated. He left part of him what he wanted. If you're a soul, you'd say there was a lost soul part. If you're psychologically oriented, you'd say dissociation. I don't care what you call it. But he was very identified with this person. And when we said, here's his problem, he never experienced dying because part of him left his body before because he didn't know that he had died through experience. So I said, well, here's what you got to do. You have to come back into the body and tell him he actually has died. And you have to have him go through a death process, which is called a POA practice in Buddhism. And he goes through that and he leaves the body this time by choice and goes to the light. And he says, I feel great. All of his stomach problems that you will hear from him, they went away. I don't know if they've come back or not. I haven't heard from him. Now, the interesting thing is he discovered, I guess there was enough information about this man that he could actually find this man's name in 1873 in Missouri. So that's an interesting story. I had another guy who knew he didn't know anything about this history, but he knew that he was a low-level Nazi general. And he knew his name because it came to him when he was doing this work. And, but he didn't know that history. Well, of course, he went and checked, and he really didn't. I know this guy was like as truthful as the day is long, and he found everything about this man, including that they knew that he died somewhere in the Battle of Stalingrad, but they didn't know what happened. But he said, I know what happened. There was a forced march, and he froze to death. And he knew everything that happened, and he knew all this before he checked it out. So I would say, an obvious explanation to this is to say who we are is energy. Energy never dies. Energy can become matter by choice. So of course, theoretically, the energy can become matter, which is called Andy or Irish or whatever. And, but there's in the template, there is still engravings from like lifetimes become like years to us. But if you don't believe in past life, I'd say go read Ian Stevenson, who's written about this, or go read or if you're, go read The Afterlife Experiments by Gary Schwartz, which is an amazing book that basically proves there's an afterlife because he does these things with mediums and it's amazing. Or don't believe it because you don't care and all you want to do is get rid of your stomach problems. And any way you look at it, I have to plug in or you will lose me. But like, I don't care what you believe. It's none of my business. But of course, if your stomach problems go away and you find out, or, all this stuff happens and you start to transform and this general who what their name is talking with you and tells you everything about his life and you find out that it's all historically true, it's kind of, but you can make sense of it any way you like. It doesn't matter to me because it's not a philosophy class.
I love your answer. This is just amazing, and there's part of me again, like I want to believe in that part, but at the same time, I was thinking previously that it would be not a good idea to tap into that at one point. But would you say so? Would you say that is something that would help people to explore that avenue? Is it something that can lead to better self-knowledge? Would you agree with that?
Totally, because like I'm looking for the first time some theme can't be taken in stride or handled or integrated. And from my point of view, why be egocentric about it and say, well, my lifetime is it? That's like saying, everything revolves around the earth. No, everything does not revolve around the earth. The earth is revolving around the sun, which eventually is revolving around life. So, if you think everything, it's the movement from egocentricity to life centricity. Egocentricity to me says like the whole world revolves around me. I'm like an infant. I mean, something happened to me, the world is supposed to move because the world is me, right? And I think we found that we thought that was true. Well, man is the epicenter of everything. No, Darwin kind of threw a loop into that one. And, Copernicus and Galileo came along, and, toddlers do grow up eventually and say, maybe the whole world doesn't revolve around me. And I think it's the same thing with lifetimes. But that doesn't mean this lifetime doesn't count. It just means like, there's some people, all they want to do is past life work, and they're very disappointed when I say, well, really, no, it's what happened to you at age 8 in this lifetime. But other people don't believe it at all. And I say, I don't care how you believe it, but like, like we had one woman, I mean, I can tell you all kinds of stories about karmic past lives, which is reincarnation, or genealogical ones where, it's really something happened in your bloodline. But I still think that's energetic. And when they transform those stories, things that they had worked on in this lifetime for ages just went away, because really this lifetime was just a reliving of something else that was in a template already waiting to be healed. And so I find that I say, if you open to everything, right? Why, I mean, if we can think it, why can't it be so or useful, right? But if you don't open to everything, then that's where something will, like, we have people who believe in ghosts, but don't believe in extraterrestrials that can put implants in your ears. We have other people who believe that you can be abducted, but they don't believe in dark energies that can take you over. I say, why, if you can think about it, it's possible. Mm-hmm. All we're looking for, and I can tell you stories that are not of normative Western reality. And other lifetimes is relatively simple, but, someone being taken over by demonic energies and then suddenly, becoming psychotic and dissociative identity disorder, and you take care of that one dark energy and they're never hospitalized again. Well, I don't know. I can tell you, I have that story documented, and I found out because I saw that woman 25 years later, and she told me after she found that story being taken over when she was 8 years old, when her whole container cracked and crumbled, and 38 years later we put it back together because we got rid of that dark energy, which she knew how to do amazingly. And she was hospitalized at least once a year for having bugs crawling all over her body while she couldn't account for time, and suddenly she's not having bugs crawling all over her body and she can account for time because we take care of an energy that took her over when she's 8 years old. Do I care if it's real or not? Does she? She wasn't like as miserable. She was still miserable, but she wasn't as miserable. So I don't care.
But what about ancestors and genetics? You're talking genealogy. I mean, how would that fit in with the concept of past life? If it's not like, we come from our ancestors, if it's something else, like this is where I try to wrap my head around. It's a philosophical question, but I just can't conceive of all of it together.
Well, just think about it this way. Here's how I would think about it.
Yeah.
Think about this concept. It's a mystical, well, it's a biological concept that's also holographic, right? Mm-hmm. We have 3 trillion cells, right? Mm-hmm. 3 trillion, a lot of human cells. Now, on the surface, you'll never find 2 that are theoretically alike.
Yeah, and right? That's amazing.
Right? But underneath it, they all have to be alike. That's how you could take one cell, and you could theoretically, if you have enough information, you can take one cell and clone a whole sheep in its current form, which means all the information that has ever happened, is happening, and potentially can happen is all held in the template of that cell, including everything that ever happened in the past before it was born, because that cell was not around when that sheep was born, likely. Mm-hmm. But the template's there. So it's remembering something before it was born. It's remembering something. Now, what I'd say is, of course, we are our ancestors. I don't think it's material. I think it's energetic. I'll tell you why. I mean, I've had all kinds of stories where people healed something 5 generations ago, and I'll tell you the most interesting story about that. We had one story where there was a young man in our office, and he worked on something on his mother's side about repressed rage. I remember this. And I don't remember the story. I remember what happened after, and it really transformed something. He walks out, and his mother, who's in the waiting room, said, "Did you work on something on my side? Because I feel different." She didn't know what was going on, but she felt different. You know why? Because we changed all of history. Because when you change your relationship with history, you change history, even if the facts are the same. So, and why I say I don't think that it's biological, let's suppose we're working on something in your great grandmother that happened to her when she's 50, but she had your grandmother when she was 30, but you're still holding the thing that happened to her when she was 50. Well, it can't exactly be biological, if that makes sense, because the trauma happened after your ancestor was born, right? So I'd say we hold energetically everything that ever happened. It's just some things are closer in and some things are further out. And what I would say is there are two ways you could talk. If you talk about soul, there are two ways it can come. One is through an energy, literally, that's called karma, or it's called karmic past life, it's called reincarnation. But one is through the energy, not the material of blood, but the energetic of blood as the carrier of soul. And in that way, the blood was already there in the grandmother, even though something was going to happen in the future. I'll tell you something even weirder. You know where some of our problems originate? In what we call the future, because there is no such thing as time. They just feel, how can, now let me ask you something. How is it that your current wife could have a precognitive dream? How is it?
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
Well, how is it? What's your explanation? How can you have a precognitive dream?
Well, personally, I think there is something we can tap into that what mediums would do, which is beyond time. So where you get to basically zoom out and see like the whole lifeline. But then that kind of scares me because then that means it's destiny because it would have happened anyway when you can see it in that sense. But
No,
yeah, that's my
it's
issue.
probabilities.
Okay. Kind of
Destiny,
like genes, I guess. The
what?
probability that genes, genetic material that has like could go this way or that way in many
Yes,
cases. Yeah.
right. And then the question is, how much do you follow life? Now, the other thing is there are streams happening on all kinds of levels. There are streams that are personal, and there are streams that are profoundly collective. And it's very hard to do something on the personal level about something that's profoundly collective, because it's like all of life is heading in that direction. So to fight that, it would be like you'd have to be as big as life, right? But for the personal stuff, of course, there's streams, but the streams go into the future. The streams go into the past in this lifetime. The streams go into future lifetimes. The streams go into past lifetimes. The streams go into parallel lifetimes. The streams go into something where you knew some green woman from Alpha Centauri who, and you were her, and she came down to earth and said, are you kidding me? I want out of here and I feel totally alienated. And they told me I was supposed to help, and this place is bananas. Why not? If you can think of it. So I say, why can't it be that you have a trauma because you were an extraterrestrial, but now you're in human form, or somebody walked in on you? Like, who cares? Or why can't it be a demonic force? It's just like your father screaming at you. It's just energy. It's just the most powerful narrative that is, and we know soul now mainly through narrative. I think at some point or other, we'll know it in other ways. But right now, what are our stories? They're ways of revealing soul, really, right? Encompassed in, it's like, oh my gosh, that's the lesson I was trying to learn. And it comes through in these narratives. Now, again, I'd say, of course, you can carry a story from your great-great-grandfather on your mother's side. And that may be all of why you're suffering in this lifetime, because it never got resolved and has been playing out through the family forever. And I can give you all kinds of, we have 3 of those stories in the book. Go read them. I mean, like, we try to give you at least one example of everything in that book, because, like, you know, it's a smorgasbord. But like, open to everything. Open to all possibilities of the causes of your suffering and all possibilities of the resolution. Why limit yourself? It's all there.
One of the things that I never thought about until talking to you right now is the idea of healing, and how healing is not just about myself now. Healing could also go back to the past, the present, and into the future. And I don't think I've ever thought of it until this moment about that idea. So it becomes like so much more important for me personally to heal and be able to transmit, as you're doing with your book, with your work, and expanding those circles.
I want to put what you just said into a big, beautiful ball and like say, remember that. I think what happens is you take such a broader view when you begin to look at it this way. You're not an isolated being.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're not just healing Irish.
Mm-hmm.
You are an enormous community, and Irish just happens to be the one that happens to be shining on the surface right now. So Irish has a choice that the other ones don't have. Arish's choice is he going to realize they're all there? Is he going to not pay any attention to them? That's Arish's choice. But as soon as you realize, you say, oh my God, I'm doing something that's transforming my whole bloodline. I'm doing something that's transforming a whole energy line. I'm doing something that's transforming what happened on, where do you live, Arish?
Vancouver, Canada.
You know, I'm healing the water in Vancouver because it was polluted, but I am that polluted water, and I could become the polluted water and find out what happened to it. And then I could be in a different relationship with polluted water because I am polluted water, and suddenly the polluted water starts to change. It's kind of weird, but it's true. So you're everything, and that's who you are. And it's just like, then it's like concentric circles. I mean, some things are, you know, so that's why, you know, think universal, but be local. I mean, it's very hard, you know, but theoretically you can, if you had a big enough energy and they called you Jesus, you could say, well, all of humanity right now needs to have their hearts open. So guess what? Life is calling for a sacrifice. But if you get sacrificed, it affects, well, we don't know what's going to do, but like, you know, give it a shot and see what happens. Because, you know.
And speaking of miracles, I mean, it's a miracle that we're interacting here. If we look back into the past, it's a miracle that the great grandparents met, maybe by accident, and that it happened at that time, and everything evolved and developed, and technology developed to this point that I got an email, that I sent an email, he responded to it, he scheduled the meeting, and here we are. So it's just coincidences after coincidence that build up, and it's just being like, it's a miracle that we exist and that we exist in this moment. And that is something that I had thought about. If you change one of the items, it might be insignificant, or even if I didn't go to Mexico and decided not to, or go to a different town, that would have changed the whole perspective of things. But the way it worked out, this is how we are, and this is perfect in itself. This is perfection. We don't have to look beyond or elsewhere. It's just perfect the way it came together in this moment. And I think that is the miracle in itself.
And if you know that on one level, it's perfect just the way it is, then that's a miracle. But then you have to know that everything is perfect the way it is, and that's very hard because some things don't turn out like your wife. You know, you have to know on one level that even if something horrific happens, it's perfect the way it is, and that's way harder, you know.
That is hard, but it's also having gratitude, and the way we know now, and in psychology, it's been proven how beneficial gratitude is for your well-being, for your health, and it's just such a wonderful thing to engage in, and we have so much to be grateful for, even if it doesn't seem like it in many circumstances.
Well, I think that's true, but like when you can be grateful for cancer, right? Or you could be grateful for what looks like tragedy. Mm-hmm. And on a human level, that we're not there. I mean, because on a human level, we're in a lot of pain.
It's very hard to accept that, yes.
You know, it's much easier to be grateful for, I followed my path and, you know, I happened to meet this amazing woman and we have a kid.
But even so, there are things you can be grateful for, even though you're suffering from cancer, because there are many things there too. So it's really like, what do we focus on? And you will find something to be grateful for. I know I'm grateful for our conversation here, which has been mind-boggling, to say the least here. And I just want to remind everyone, your book is The 1 Hour Miracle, a 5-step process to guide your self-healing. Dr. Andrew Hahn, you're a licensed clinical psychologist, and you are practicing life-centered therapy. That's correct?
Yes, and they can find us at lifecenteredtherapy.com. Please buy the book, or you can listen to the book as an audio. We only, right now, for the last 2 years, we've only been doing online training. We train everybody to do what's in that book. You can find all of our certified therapists, and you can find everything about us. And if you want to talk to me, if you go to lifecenteredtherapy.com and you go Hahn, because my name is Andy Hahn, and you write to me, I write back. I'm the only person who gets those messages if you send it to me. If you send it to our institute, I'm not the only person, but if you send it to me, I will respond to you. I eventually respond to everything. And I only have one more thing to say. You know what that is?
I don't.
We said we were not going to go longer than Robert Thurman.
I know. It's amazing. And it's also like, we have to, because we talked about how it won't be the longest podcast. Most likely it won't be. And it is officially the longest podcast I've ever done. So thank you for that. It's because
Robert,
you're such
forgive us. Forgive us,
amazing guest
Robert.
to have. And I still feel that, we could go on another hour, but at some point we do have to come to an end. But if you would like to repeat any point at any time, I would love to have you on Arash's World again.
Arash, it would be my pleasure. I mean, let's set it up. You tell me when, I'll say yes.
Wonderful. Thank you
Right?
so much,
Because
Dr. Hahn.
it's like, well, thank you. I mean, like, you made this possible, and I'm getting, like tingling all over. So that says to me, yeah, you invite me back. I'm there. I'll talk to you whenever you like. Just make me an offer I can't refuse.
I
'Cause-
will. Absolutely.
Thank you
Thanks so
so
much.
much. Okay.
Take care.